welcome to another video. In today's video, the history of policing. So let's kick this video off with a question. And go ahead and stop the video and put your answer down there in the comment section. As you know right now, what is the largest theft, the largest subsection of theft in this country currently? Okay, I'm not going to go through and name all the different kinds of theft. So, all right, you have your answer down there? Perfect. Okay, so here is the real answer.
That wage theft affects 17% of low-wage workers. Affected workers were losing an average of $3,300 per year. That means the amount of money stolen from workers far exceeds what's stolen in actual property crimes, like robberies and car theft. Wage theft predominantly affects low-wage workers.
All right, so let's remember that for a little later. So the history of policing in America, going back to when things really started needing policing, from the way things were going, and it actually, there's two kind of separate origins of policing. Okay, so you have the Southern origin, which the origin of Southern policing is found in slave catchers. So plantation slave owners hired guys to go hunt their escaped slaves. Then those guys became the police. Okay? So now that's the Southern development of policing. And then we have the Northern development of policing, which evolves from people having more stuff than they could physically watch themselves, basically. So you had initially gangs of migrants would come to, would be robbing somebody, right? They'd go into like a guy's warehouse or a store or whatever, and they'd rob him over and over and over again. And then the guy finally would just hire them to not rob him. Okay, so then those people kind of developed into like security guards. But then in 1850-ish, we have our very first official police station in New York City. Now, before that, we had a system of sheriffs. And today, sheriffs and police, although they do have some unique duties, are for all intents and purposes the same. They have the same training, they have the same equipment, they operate on the same frequencies, like radio communications, all that. Okay, they're for all intents and purposes, in modern America, a sheriff and a police officer are more or less identical. Back before the adoption of police, the sheriff system that was around the United States, and it even goes back to England, although England's sheriff system and the United States sheriff system are nothing alike. So back then, it was A sheriff, maybe a sheriff and a deputy or two, depending on the area. And they were elected officials. And if they needed more people, they would deputize citizens. And that's how it went for quite a while until the 1850s. Okay? So now the 1850s started, and this whole idea of policing started to spread around. Well, we got pretty much almost immediately with the Civil War was a giant need for policing because the losers, not all of them, a good amount of them, went on crime sprees after the Civil War. So, in response to that, there was a lot of police development, okay? So, and the police development along in the South actually just took a shift and just went right back to basically slavery with Jim Crow laws, and the police then were the ones implementing this, okay? Now, just to make it quite clear, the civil rights of the 50s and the 60s, that was civil rights from the police. That's who people needed civil rights from. The police were the people. So we're talking about 100 years that it took for the police to go from, relatively obscure, watching people's stuff, to all the way to nearly like religious, implementing of laws, like morality police, especially if you were any sort of immigrant or homosexual. I mean, it's quite recently that police would go into gay bars and just beat up everybody for being gay. That is not very far back in the past. Okay? Now, as policing has evolved, I think I'm in Oregon, and Oregon got a big transfusion of losers from the South, from the Civil War, came to Oregon, literally wrote KKK stuff right into the Constitution of Oregon. That's all since been removed, I'm pretty sure. But, so that is Oregon's policing, in my opinion, is derived more from the South than the North because of the time and the influx. It just happened that way. So, now, we can see the original policing in the North was people with money paying for the police, okay? So, nowadays, we spend all this money on the police, and there's a lot of problems that we have in society currently that pretty much are the only kind of solutions that we could possibly have, unfortunately, is the police. Now, as we've seen in Iraq, when you just let go all the police and military, they turn into ISIS, okay? So the goal is to create a society that doesn't need police, doesn't have criminals, doesn't need police, okay? Every single person in a jail cell, every single homeless person is an indictment of how broken our system is. Because technologically speaking, It was the best we could do. As we get better technology, we can do a lot better. But we have to start working towards this to make it happen. And part of this is defunding the police a little bit, taking some of this like militarized level policing out. I mean, obviously not completely, but a little bit from that end of the policing. So less militarized policing, right? And we transfer that money into mental health to kind of try to replace the system, a new, better system that was completely just trashed in the 80s by the Reagan regime, okay? So unfortunately, nothing got put back into place, and the police have been dealing with that ever since, okay? And crime has been getting worse ever since, right? It's probably directly follows the same trend lines, I would imagine. So, but as we can see, the number one crime is rich people stealing from poor people. You never hear about this because it is not very entertaining to watch on the news some rich accountant fudge some numbers. But oh boy, that homeless person goes into a pharmacy and loads his backpack full of toiletries and just ignores security and walks out. Oh boy, that sure is entertaining to watch, isn't it? And oh boy, it sure is. That crime is so big. Well, you know, I would venture to say that we don't have the police to go after the people that are doing the biggest crime by design. And if the biggest crime was not the biggest theft, wage theft, if this biggest crime was not a thing, then I would argue that all this other petty theft wouldn't be a thing. I mean, it's cause and reaction. People go to work, they get ripped off, they know they're getting ripped off. People watch the banks trash the whole economy and nobody goes to jail. And the reason is because we've invested our whole entire mindset into this whole that this policing needs to be watching in just one direction. Like, we don't have police watching the police or really the rich people. So, and it's quite convenient that the originators of the police and the whole theory of the police were the rich people, right? So, the problems need to be solved. We have a massive issue with police intellect. Okay, and they discovered this back in the 70s. You know, I mean, it's like, oh, the civil rights era. Hey, police are out of control, which is why we needed civil rights from the police. Don't get that messed up. It was the civil rights from the police and or the government, okay? And the government via the police. That's why we needed civil rights. Then, about 20 years later, they're like, why we had all these problems? Oh, turns out cops were below average intelligence. And they discovered this in the 70s, and they've been working on that ever since. But they straight up will not hire police if their intellect is too high because they're worried about them getting bored at their job. Well, there's the other side of that maybe if we had really smart cops, that they'd be going after the biggest kind of crime that's stealing the most money from the most people, right? Wage theft, right? So that's where the real big crime is, and that would take a real smart person to figure that out and to solve that problem. Well, guess who they don't have in the police departments? Real smart people. At best, the IQ of officers is around 100, give or take, by design. Not high enough to go after the people stealing the most money. So, this is the problem. This is a real problem, right? We have civil forfeiture. We have prohibition laws. We have the prohibition crowd. We would not have the Federal Bureau of Investigation if we had never outlawed alcohol. That is what the federal government had to come up with to clean up the crime spree created by their outlawing of a substance. Oh gee, fast forward 50 years, now we have Nixon.
We have launched an all-out offensive against crime, against narcotics, against permissiveness in our country.
The rhetoric of get tough and law and order was part and parcel of the backlash of the civil rights movement.
Nixon administration official has admitted that the war on drugs is all about throwing black people in jail. He said, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people." You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Right here, saying, go after liberals and Jews and blacks with the drug war. We know that was their intent. We know that the original prohibition in 1902 was a racist thing. In 1903, the second one. Okay, and then we had alcohol prohibition that turned this country upside down, created the biggest gangs and violent organizations this country had ever seen. And don't get it messed up, that was because of prohibition. Now, some would argue, oh, there was a huge drinking problem. Okay, fine. Guess what dumb people do about problems? They outlaw it and they sick guys with guns on the problem. Here's what smart people do with problems of substances: awareness campaigns, education, telling people what this does to their body, how it does it to their body, encouraging people to live a more healthy lifestyle, okay? And guess what? That way doesn't end up in these huge violent gangs. But now they've done this rinse and repeat with the drug war. And holy mackerel, they have been dubbed like alcohol prohibition was only like 10 years. They've been on this same drug war for 50 years. And the drug war was started by a guy who had to bail out of office for being a criminal. And we keep doing this because the intellect, and we're like feeding some strange cult of people who think that putting people in cages and blaming substances for everything is like a good way, right? Like in an intelligent way of dealing with people and substances, you don't give them less time for their bad actions on, oh, you did something bad while you were high? What the hell's wrong with you? Yeah, that's even worse. But no, In this, if you just, oh yeah, it was the drugs that made me do it. Oh, it's the alcohol that made me do it. If you use that shit as a scapegoat, you're now going to get less time. Therefore, you're just lying to reinforce the BS that is all based on racism and political. I mean, we straight up, Nixon, I want to go after liberals, Jews, and blacks. And that's why we have the drug war on crack. The shit was outlawed before that, but they sure in the hell weren't doing what they're doing now. Feel free to look up what this has become. Civil forfeiture, just everyday people getting their stuff jacked from them. This is what policing has become. We wouldn't have the FBI. We wouldn't have the DEA if we didn't have a government that thought prohibition was a way of dealing with stuff. If we had an intellectual government that was, well, intellectual and simply said, if you drink too much booze, you will freaking die a horrible death. You can drink moderation, have a nice life, and rinse and repeat for every damn substance, then we would not have gangs. We would not have an entire, from Central America being a whole entire shit show because of our stupid ass laws. Okay? So, this is what this has become, all right? From basically slave owners needing some people to go chase down their slaves to, and then from rich guys needing their stuff to get watched, all the way to just no freaking civil rights and a crazy police state with police that are just literally out of control, stealing people's stuff, harassing people online, harassing people endlessly. I mean, it has become insane and needs to be reeled in, because the real crime isn't what those people are dealing with. Why are we paying all this money and we never get justice on the people who are doing the biggest criminal acts? 2008, big banks, trash the economy. Nobody goes to jail because nobody's smart enough to go after them. Now, currently, same story. Now it's the wages. That's straight up, because you know what? They're like, yeah, the cops are too busy sitting on their asses looking on Craigslist like they're doing something. B, being, gobbled around to do like things that they should never have been assigned to do, like mentally ill people, okay? And then being empowered to go and just steal people's stuff through all these prohibition style laws, okay? So, this is the true history of policing. Period. Proof evidence. Okay, so now stay tuned for part 2.